Chapter 17. And one of the 7 angels that had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come, I will show you the judgment upon the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, whereas those who inhabit the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And he carried me away in the power of the Spirit into a wilderness. And I caught sight of a woman sitting upon a scarlet-colored wild beast that was full of blasphemous names, and that had 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and was adorned with gold and precious stone and pearls, and had in her hand a golden cup that was full of disgusting things, and the unclean things of her fornication. And upon her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and of the disgusting things of the earth. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the holy ones, and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. Well, on catching sight of her, I wondered with great wonderment. And so the angel said to me, Why is it you wondered? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, and of the wild beast that is carrying her, and that has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The wild beast that you saw was, but is not, and yet is about to ascend out of the abyss, and it is to go off into destruction. And when they see how the wild beast was, but is not, and yet will be present, those who dwell on the earth will wonder admiringly. But their names have not been written upon the scroll of life from the founding of the world. Here is where the intelligence that has wisdom comes in. The 7 heads mean 7 mountains, where the woman sits on top. And there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet arrived. But when he does arrive, he must remain a short while. And the wild beast that was, but is not, it is also itself an 8th king, but springs from the 7, and it goes off into destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw mean 10 kings, who have not yet received a kingdom, but they do receive authority as kings 1 hour with the wild beast. These have one thought, and so they give their power and authority to the wild beast. These will battle with the Lamb, but because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, the Lamb will conquer them. Also those called and chosen and faithful with him will do so. And he says to me, The waters that you saw where the harlot is sitting mean peoples and crowds and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns that you saw, and the wild beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her devastated and naked, and will eat up her fleshy parts, and will completely burn her with fire. For God put it into their hearts to carry out his thought, even to carry out their one thought, by giving their kingdom to the wild beast, until the words of God will have been accomplished. And the woman whom you saw means the great city that has a kingdom over the kings of the earth. Chapter 18. After these things, I saw another angel descending from heaven, with great authority, and the earth was lighted up from his glory. And he cried out with a strong voice, saying, She has fallen! Babylon the Great has fallen! And she has become a dwelling place of demons, and a lurking place of every unclean exhalation, and a lurking place of every unclean and hated bird. For because of the wine of the anger of her fornication, all the nations have fallen victim, And the kings of the earth committed fornication with her, and the traveling merchants of the earth became rich due to the power of her shameless luxury. And I heard another voice out of heaven say, "Get out of her, my people, if you do not want to share with her in her sins, and if you do not want to receive part of her plagues. For her sins have massed together clear up to heaven, and God has called her acts of injustice to mind. Render to her even as she herself rendered, and do to her twice as much, yes, twice the number of the things she did. In the cup in which she put a mixture, put twice as much of the mixture for her. To the extent that she glorified herself and lived in shameless luxury, to that extent give her torment and mourning. For in her heart she keeps saying, I sit a queen, and I am no widow, and I shall never see mourning. That is why in one day her plagues will come, death and mourning and famine, and she will be completely burned with fire, because Jehovah God, who judged her, is strong. And the kings of the earth who committed fornication with her and lived in shameless luxury will weep and beat themselves in grief over her when they look at the smoke from the burning of her, while they stand at a distance because of their fear of her torment and say, Too bad, you great city, Babylon, you strong city, because in 1 hour your judgment has arrived. Also the traveling merchants of the earth are weeping and mourning over her, because there is no one to buy their full stock anymore, a full stock of gold and silver and precious stone and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and everything in scented wood, and every sort of ivory object, and every sort of object out of most precious wood, and of copper, and of iron, and of marble. Also cinnamon, and Indian spice, and incense, and perfumed oil, and frankincense, and wine, and olive oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and cattle, and sheep, and horses, and coaches, and slaves, and human souls. Yes, the fine fruit that your soul desired has departed from you, and all the dainty things and the gorgeous things have perished from you, and never again will people find them. The traveling merchants of these things, who became rich from her, will stand at a distance because of their fear of her torment, and will weep and mourn, saying, Too bad, the great city, clothed with fine linen and purple and scarlet, and richly adorned with gold ornament and precious stone and pearl, because in 1 hour such great riches have been devastated. And every ship captain, and every man that voyages anywhere, and sailors, and all those who make a living by the sea, stood at a distance, and cried out as they looked at the smoke from the burning of her, and said, What city is like the great city? And they threw dust upon their heads, and cried out, weeping and mourning, and said, Too bad, the great city, in which all those having boats at sea became rich by reason of her costliness, because in 1 hour she has been devastated. Be glad over her, O heaven, also you holy ones, and you apostles, and you prophets, because God has judicially exacted punishment for you from her. And a strong angel lifted up a stone like a great millstone, and hurled it into the sea, saying, Thus with a swift pitch will Babylon the great city be hurled down, and she will never be found again. And the sound of singers who accompany themselves on the harp, and of musicians, and of flutists, and of trumpeters will never be heard in you again. And no craftsman of any trade will ever be found in you again. and no sound of a millstone will ever be heard in you again. And no light of a lamp will ever shine in you again, and no voice of a bridegroom and of a bride will ever be heard in you again. Because your traveling merchants were the top-ranking men of the earth, for by your spiritistic practice all the nations were misled. Yes, in her was found the blood of prophets, and of holy ones, and of all those who have been slaughtered on the earth. Chapter 19. After these things, I heard what was as a loud voice of a great crowd in heaven. They said, "Praise Jah, you people! The salvation and the glory and the power belong to our God, because his judgments are true and righteous. For he has executed judgment upon the great harlot, who corrupted the earth with her fornication, and he has avenged the blood of his slaves at her hand." And right away for the second time they said, "Praise Jah, you people! And the smoke from her goes on ascending for ever and ever." And the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures fell down and worshipped God seated upon the throne, and said, "Amen. Praise Jah, you people." Also a voice issued forth from the throne and said, "Be praising our God, all you his slaves, who fear him, the small ones and the great." And I heard what was as a voice of a great crowd, and as a sound of many waters, and as a sound of heavy thunders. They said, "Praise Jah, you people, because Jehovah our God, the Almighty, has begun to rule as King. Let us rejoice and be overjoyed, and let us give him the glory, because the marriage of the Lamb has arrived, and his wife has prepared herself. Yes, it has been granted to her to be arrayed in bright, clean, fine linen, for the fine linen stands for the righteous acts of the holy ones." And he tells me, "Write, happy are those invited to the evening meal of the Lamb's marriage." Also, he tells me, "These are the true sayings of God." At that I fell down before his feet to worship him. But he tells me, "Be careful, do not do that. All I am is a fellow slave of you and of your brothers who have the work of witnessing to Jesus. Worship God, for the bearing witness to Jesus is what inspires prophesying." And I saw the heaven opened, and look, a white horse, and the one seated upon it is called Faithful and True, and he judges and carries on war in righteousness. His eyes are a fiery flame, and upon his head are many diadems. He has a name written that no one knows but he himself. And he is arrayed with an outer garment sprinkled with blood, and the name he is called is the Word of God. Also, the armies that were in heaven were following him on white horses, and they were clothed in white, clean, fine linen. And out of his mouth there protrudes a sharp, long sword, that he may strike the nations with it, and he will shepherd them with a rod of iron. He treads too the winepress of the anger of the wrath of God the Almighty. And upon his outer garment, even upon his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I saw also an angel standing in the sun, and he cried out with a loud voice, and said to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven, "Come here, be gathered together to the great evening meal of God, that you may eat the fleshy parts of kings, and the fleshy parts of military commanders, and the fleshy parts of strong men, and the fleshy parts of horses, and of those seated upon them, and the fleshy parts of all, of free men, as well as of slaves, and of small ones, and great. And I saw the wild beast, and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to wage the war with the one seated on the horse, and with his army. And the wild beast was caught, and along with it the false prophet that performed in front of it the signs with which he misled those who receive the mark of the wild beast, and those who render worship to its image. While still alive, they both were hurled into the fiery lake that burns with sulfur. But the rest were killed off with the long sword of the one seated on the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth. And all the birds were filled from the fleshy parts of them.